My name is Rebecca Martinez, and at 38 years old, I had quietly built one of the most successful renewable energy companies in the world. I was driving through the familiar streets of Boulder Creek, Colorado, heading to my family's annual Christmas gathering for the first time in 8 years. My stomach churned with anxiety as I approached the sprawling ranch house where I'd grown up, knowing that this dinner would either heal old wounds or tear them open forever. If you're reading this story, please upvote and let me know in the comments what you think about family dynamics and worth. This is a night that completely transformed my relationship with my family, and I want to share every detail with you because sometimes the most dramatic revelations happen when you least expect them. I grew up in Boulder Creek, a picturesque mountain town about an hour outside of Denver, where my family owned the largest ranch in the valley. The Martinez Ranch had been in our family for 4 generations, spanning over 15,000 acres of pristine Colorado landscape dotted with grazing cattle and bordered by snow-capped peaks. Our house sat on a hill overlooking the valley, a massive log and stone structure that screamed old money and Western tradition. The main house alone was over 8,000 square feet, with wraparound porches, exposed beam ceilings, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the Rocky Mountains. My father, Carlos Martinez, was the 3rd generation to run the ranch, and he ruled it with an iron fist wrapped in cowboy charm. He was a man who commanded respect not just through his success, but through his sheer presence. Standing 6'3" with salt and pepper hair and weathered hands that told the story of decades of hard work, he was exactly what you'd picture when you imagined a successful rancher. From my earliest memories, it was crystal clear that my older brother Miguel and younger brother Diego were being groomed to inherit and continue the family legacy. Miguel, 5 years my senior, had the natural charisma and business sense that my father valued above all else. Even as a child, he could walk into a room and command attention. He understood cattle markets, land values, and the complex web of relationships that made the ranching business successful. Diego, 3 years younger than me, possessed an intuitive understanding of cattle and land management that impressed everyone who met him. He could look at a pasture and know exactly how many head it could support, or examine a bull and predict its breeding potential. And then there was me, caught in the middle, with dreams that extended far beyond the boundaries of our mountain valley. While my brothers spent their childhood learning to ride horses before they could properly walk, I was more interested in taking apart mechanical devices to understand how they worked. While they were memorizing cattle bloodlines, I was building my own weather station to track precipitation patterns across our land. Ranching is in our blood, Mija, my father would say whenever I expressed interest in anything beyond horses and cattle. This land has sustained our family for generations. Why would you want to throw that away for some crazy ideas about saving the world? My crazy ideas began in high school when I became fascinated with environmental science and renewable energy. It started during my sophomore year when we experienced one of the worst droughts in Colorado history. I watched my father stress about water rights, pasture conditions, and feed costs while politicians debated climate policies on television. While my brothers were learning to manage cattle herds and negotiate feed contracts, I was staying after school with Mr. Henderson, my physics teacher, building solar panels and wind turbines from scratch in the school's workshop. Mr. Henderson was a former engineer who had left the corporate world to teach after becoming disillusioned with what he called technology without purpose. He saw something in me that others missed, a combination of technical aptitude and genuine concern for environmental issues that he believed could make a real difference in the world. "You have an exceptional mind for engineering, Rebecca," Mr. Henderson told me during my senior year as we worked on a prototype battery storage system. "The world is moving toward clean energy, and brilliant minds like yours will lead that transformation. Don't let anyone convince you that your dreams are too big or too impractical." Those words would echo in my mind for years to come, especially during the darkest moments when it seemed like everyone I loved was telling me I was wasting my life chasing impossible goals. When college application season arrived, I set my sights on MIT's environmental engineering program. I spent countless hours researching the faculty, studying their published papers, and crafting what I believed was the perfect application. The acceptance letter arrived on a snowy February morning, and I was thrilled beyond words. I rushed to my father's office to share the news, convinced that even he would be impressed by such a prestigious acceptance. My father's reaction was immediate and crushing. "Massachusetts? That's halfway across the country," he scoffed when I showed him the letter in his office, a rustic room dominated by antique Western furniture and family photos dating back to the 1800s. The walls were lined with awards from cattle associations, newspaper clippings about record-breaking sales, and photographs of 4 generations of Martinez men standing proudly with prize-winning bulls. "The ranch needs you here, Rebecca. This family business requires all hands on deck. I tried to explain that MIT had one of the world's best renewable energy programs, that I could learn technologies that might even benefit the ranch someday. I talked about developing more efficient irrigation systems, solar-powered equipment, and sustainable land management techniques. My father's expression grew stern as I spoke, his jaw setting in the way it did when his mind was made up. Your brothers are already committed to business degrees at Colorado State, so they can properly manage our operations, he explained, as if I were a child who couldn't understand basic logic. We can't afford to send 3 children to expensive out-of-state schools for impractical degrees. Impractical? I challenged, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Dad, renewable energy is the future. Climate change is already affecting ranching communities across the West. The drought last year cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars. Climate change, he repeated dismissively, leaning back in his leather chair. Rebecca, we've been ranching this land for over a century through droughts, floods, blizzards, and everything else nature could throw at us. We survived the Dust Bowl, the oil crisis, and every economic downturn since the 1920s. We don't need some fancy East Coast education to tell us how to manage our land. The conversation continued for over an hour, with me presenting every argument I could think of, and my father systematically dismantling each one. He pointed out that renewable energy was an unproven industry full of failed startups and government subsidies that could disappear at any moment. He reminded me that the ranch provided stable, honest work that would always be needed. He questioned whether I really wanted to spend my life in laboratories and office buildings instead of working with my hands under the open sky. The conversation ended with him refusing to help with tuition, just as it had with my siblings for their more practical educations. The difference was that Miguel and Diego were attending an in-state school that cost a fraction of MIT's tuition. They would graduate debt-free, while I would be facing 6-figure student loans if I pursued my dreams. So I did exactly what I had to do. I deferred my admission for a year and worked 4 jobs simultaneously, waitressing at the local diner during breakfast and lunch shifts, cleaning houses for wealthy Denver transplants who owned vacation homes in our area, doing bookkeeping for small businesses in town during evenings, and working weekends at a solar panel installation company an hour away in Denver. I saved every penny, sleeping only 4 or 5 hours a night, turning down social invitations, and wearing the same clothes until they were threadbare. My mother, Elena, watched this with growing concern. She would leave extra food in the refrigerator when she knew I'd be coming home late from work, and she quietly supplemented my wardrobe with clothes she claimed she no longer wanted. But she never contradicted my father's decision or offered financial help directly. She came from a generation of women who supported their husbands' decisions publicly, even when they disagreed privately. "Mia, are you sure this is what you want?" she asked me one evening as I sat at the kitchen table, simultaneously working on scholarship applications and balancing the books for a local hardware store. "College will always be there. You could take a few years to help around the ranch, maybe meet a nice young man from one of the neighboring families." I looked up from my calculator, exhausted but determined. "Mom, this is my one chance. If I don't go now, I'll never leave. I'll end up like Cousin Maria, married at 22 to someone Dad approves of, spending my life wondering what might have been." She was quiet for a long moment, then reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then you do what you need to do, Misha. Just remember that no matter what happens, you'll always have a home here." I took out substantial student loans, applied for every scholarship I could find, and finally made it to MIT the following fall. The day I left for Boston was one of the most bittersweet of my life. My mother cried as she helped me pack, pressing homemade cookies and a hand-knitted scarf into my bags. Miguel and Diego offered awkward hugs and promises to visit that we all knew wouldn't happen. My father shook my hand formally and wished me luck, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. College was brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. While other students enjoyed the typical university experience, parties, sports games, study groups that turned into social gatherings, I was constantly working to pay for basic necessities. I survived on ramen noodles and coffee, slept maybe 5 hours a night during finals week, and wore the same 3 outfits rotated throughout each week. My roommate was from a wealthy Connecticut family who couldn't understand why I turned down invitations to expensive restaurants or weekend trips to New York City. But I thrived academically, earning top grades in every engineering course and conducting research with professors who were pioneering the next generation of renewable energy technologies. I worked in labs that were developing more efficient solar cells, assisted with research on advanced battery chemistry, and co-authored papers on grid-scale energy storage. The work was fascinating and challenging in ways that ranching had never been for me. During my junior year, I was selected for a competitive internship at a clean tech startup in San Francisco. The company was developing next-generation lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles, and I spent the summer learning about everything from electrochemistry to manufacturing processes to venture capital funding. It was my first real exposure to Silicon Valley culture, and I was amazed by the optimism and ambition that permeated everything. You should consider staying in California after graduation, my supervisor, Dr. Jennifer Chen, told me at the end of the internship. There are opportunities here that don't exist anywhere else, especially for someone with your combination of technical skills and practical thinking. Meanwhile, back in Colorado, Miguel and Diego had graduated and joined the ranch as full partners. Every phone call home included updates about their achievements and my father's pride in them. Miguel had negotiated contracts with several high-end restaurants in Denver, positioning our beef as premium, locally sourced product that commanded top dollar. Diego had implemented new grazing techniques that increased productivity while improving soil health. Together, they were transforming the ranch from a traditional cattle operation into a modern agricultural business. The boys just secured a contract with that fancy steakhouse chain, my mother, Elena, would report during our monthly calls. Your father is so proud. Miguel negotiated a premium price for our grass-fed beef, and Diego has improved our breeding program so much that we're producing the highest quality cattle in the region. They're even talking about expanding into organic certification. I was genuinely happy for my brother's success, but the contrast was painful. When I shared news about my work developing more efficient solar cells or securing patents for battery technology, the response was polite but clearly disinterested. My family didn't understand what I was doing or why it mattered. To them, I was playing with expensive toys while my brothers were building something real and substantial. My first job after graduation was with a startup in San Francisco, developing advanced battery storage systems for solar energy. The company, SunGrid Technologies, had been founded by two MIT graduates who were trying to solve one of renewable energy's biggest challenges: how to store power when the sun wasn't shining. The salary was modest, barely enough to afford a tiny apartment in one of the city's less desirable neighborhoods. But the experience was invaluable. I worked directly with the founders, absorbing everything I could about building a company from scratch. I learned about raising venture capital, protecting intellectual property, scaling manufacturing processes, and navigating regulatory requirements. I also learned about failure when SunGrid ran out of money 18 months later, despite having what I believed was superior technology. The company's collapse was devastating, but educational. I watched brilliant engineers struggle with business realities, saw promising technologies fail because of poor marketing, and learned that having the best product doesn't guarantee success. When SunGrid was acquired by a larger company for barely enough to pay off its debts, I had enough savings and knowledge to start thinking about my own venture. The breaking point with my family came 6 years ago during a brief visit home for my cousin's wedding. I had just left my startup job to launch my own company, using my savings and a small angel investment to begin developing what would become revolutionary battery technology. I was excited to share my plans with my family, hoping that they might finally understand the potential of what I was working on. During a family dinner at the ranch, my father asked about my latest project in a tone that suggested it was merely a hobby, something I did between real jobs. Actually, I've started my own company, I explained, trying to contain my enthusiasm. We're developing solid-state batteries that can store renewable energy more efficiently than anything currently on the market. The technology could completely transform how the electrical grid works. Solid-state what? Diego laughed, shaking his head. Rebecca, when are you going to stop playing with these gadgets and do something real with your life? You're 32 years old. Most people our age are building careers, getting married, starting families. This is real, I insisted, feeling my cheeks flush with frustration. The technology we're developing could revolutionize how the world stores and uses clean energy. We're talking about solving climate change on a global scale. Miguel, who had been quietly eating his steak, looked up with what he probably thought was brotherly concern. Sis, you're living in a fantasy world. Do you know how many tech startups fail? 90%, according to everything I've read. Don't you think it's time to settle down, maybe find a good man who can provide some stability? All this entrepreneur stuff is great for rich kids playing around with daddy's money, but eventually you need to get serious about your future. This is my future, I said firmly, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. And it's not playing around. We've already filed for 3 patents and several major manufacturers are interested in our technology. We're not some pie-in-the-sky startup. We have real solutions to real problems. My father leaned back in his chair with the expression he wore when he was about to deliver a pronouncement that would end the discussion. Rebecca, I admire your persistence, I really do. But at some point you need to accept reality. Your little inventions might seem important to you, but real business is about producing something people actually need. Cattle, land, food. These are necessities. People have to eat. They have to have places to live. Everything else is just clever marketing. He gestured around the dining room, taking in the antique furniture, the family photographs, the oil paintings of prize bulls. This ranch has supported 4 generations of our family. It's real, it's tangible, it's something you can touch and see and count. Your computers and batteries and whatever else you're working on, that's all just numbers on a screen. When the economy crashes or the government changes its mind about subsidies, all of that disappears. But people will always need food. I felt tears threatening and excused myself from the table. I left the next morning without saying goodbye, and for the next 6 years, our contact was limited to birthday cards and brief holiday phone calls. They knew I was still in California, still working in renewable energy, but I never shared details about my growing success. They never really asked for specifics, and I was too hurt and proud to offer them. During those 6 years, my company, SolarVault Technologies, had grown from a 2-person startup operating out of a garage to a major player in the renewable energy storage industry. We had developed battery technology that was 300% more efficient than existing systems, with breakthrough innovations in solid-state electrolytes that eliminated many of the safety and longevity issues that plagued traditional lithium-ion batteries. Our first major breakthrough came during my 3rd year, when we successfully created a prototype that could store and discharge energy for over 10,000 cycles without significant degradation. This was roughly 10 times the lifespan of conventional batteries, making renewable energy storage economically viable for the first time. The technology used advanced ceramic electrolytes that we had developed in partnership with researchers at Stanford and UC Berkeley. Word of our breakthrough spread quickly through the industry. We secured our first major contract with Pacific Gas and Electric to provide storage for a solar farm in Central California. Then came contracts with utility companies across 3 continents, major installations in Germany, Australia, Japan, and throughout the American Southwest. By our 5th year, we employed over 2,000 people in facilities from California to Germany to South Korea. The growth was exponential and often overwhelming. I found myself traveling constantly, meeting with utility executives, government officials, and investors. I gave presentations at energy conferences around the world, explaining how our technology could accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels. I testified before congressional committees about the importance of energy storage for grid stability and national security. Despite the success, I maintained a relatively modest lifestyle. I lived in a comfortable but not ostentatious house in Palo Alto, drove a Tesla Model S, partly for the symbolism, partly because I genuinely loved the technology, and avoided the flashy displays of wealth that characterized many Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. My only real indulgence was travel, and even that was usually business-related. The acquisition discussions with Tesla began almost 2 years ago when Elon Musk's team reached out about potentially integrating our battery technology into their energy storage products. What started as a technology licensing discussion evolved into talks about a full acquisition. Tesla was looking to dramatically expand their energy storage business, and our solid-state battery technology was exactly what they needed to achieve grid-scale deployment. The negotiations were complex and sometimes contentious. Tesla's team was demanding but also incredibly thorough, conducting extensive due diligence on our technology, our patents, our manufacturing processes, and our team. They brought in outside experts to validate our performance claims, visited our manufacturing facilities, and even spoke with our customers to verify satisfaction levels. Last month, Tesla announced they were acquiring SolarVault for $12.8 billion in cash and stock, making me one of the youngest billionaires in the clean energy sector. The deal had been in negotiation for months, but when it was finalized, my net worth jumped to $4.7 billion practically overnight. Financial magazines were calling it one of the largest clean tech acquisitions in history. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now worth more than many major corporations, including some that my father considered real businesses. My company's technology was being used to power homes and businesses around the world, reducing carbon emissions by millions of tons per year. Yet my family still thought of me as their impractical daughter who had chosen an unstable career over the security of ranching. Now, as I pulled into the circular driveway of my family's ranch house, I took a deep breath and prepared for what might be either a reconciliation or a final farewell. I had deliberately chosen to drive a modest rental car, a standard Toyota Camry, and dressed down in jeans and a simple sweater. The only hint of my success was a vintage Rolex Submariner that had been a gift to myself when we hit our first billion in revenue, but even that was hidden under my sleeve. The house looked exactly as it always did during the holidays. Warm light glowing from every window, a massive wreath on the front door, and the sound of laughter and conversation drifting from inside. Christmas lights outlined the roofline and wrapped around the porch columns, while spotlights illuminated the snow-covered landscape. For a moment, I felt like a teenager again, coming home from school to the comforting rhythm of family life. I sat in the car for several minutes, gathering my courage. 8 years was a long time to be essentially estranged from your family. Would they see the changes in me? Would I still feel like that insecure young woman, desperate for approval? Or had I truly moved beyond needing their validation? My mother answered the door, her face lighting up with genuine joy when she saw me. "Rebecca! Misha! You made it!" She pulled me into a fierce hug that smelled of her signature perfume and the cinnamon cookies she made every Christmas. She looked older than I remembered, with more grey in her dark hair and deeper lines around her eyes, but her smile was exactly the same. "I missed you, Mom," I said honestly, feeling tears threaten. "I missed this place more than I wanted to admit." "Come in! Come in! Everyone is already here, and they're all so excited to see you." The living room was packed with family members I hadn't seen in years. Miguel stood by the massive stone fireplace with his wife, Sarah, while their teenage children, Alex and Sophia, were absorbed in their phones. Alex was now 17, tall and lanky like his father, while Sophia had grown into a beautiful 15-year-old with an independent streak that reminded me of myself at that age. Diego sat on the leather sofa with his wife, Carmen, and their 10-year-old twins, Luis and Maria. The twins had inherited their father's dark hair and their mother's bright smile, and they were engaged in what appeared to be an intense video game competition on a tablet. My aunts and uncles filled the remaining chairs and sofas. Aunt Rosa and Uncle Fernando, who had driven up from Pueblo, Uncle Martinez and Aunt Patricia, who had flown in from Phoenix, and my father's younger brother, Uncle Tony, with his wife Linda and their college-age daughter, my cousin Isabella. And there, in his traditional spot in the large leather recliner that had been his domain for as long as I could remember, sat my father. He looked older than I had expected, his hair now completely grey and his face more weathered than in my memories. But his posture was still commanding, his gaze still penetrating as he assessed me from across the room. "Rebecca," he said, nodding acknowledgement. Not a hug, not even a rise from his chair. Just my name, spoken like a statement of fact. His voice was exactly as I remembered, deep, authoritative, with just a hint of the Mexican accent he had inherited from his father. "Hi, Dad. Merry Christmas," I replied, matching his tone. Miguel approached first, offering an awkward handshake that turned into a brief, somewhat stiff hug. "Welcome home, sis. California treating you well?" His greeting was polite but cautious, as if he wasn't sure what to expect from me after so many years. "It is," I replied simply, not wanting to reveal too much too quickly. "Still doing the solar panel thing?" Diego asked from the sofa, his tone suggesting he couldn't quite remember what my work actually involved. "Or have you moved on to something else by now?" "Something like that," I answered vaguely, not ready to explain the complexity of what SolarVol actually did. The pattern was depressingly familiar, and yet somehow different than I had expected. My brothers immediately launched into updates about the ranch's latest successes, but there was a new confidence in their voices that hadn't been there 8 years ago. Miguel had just secured a contract to supply organic beef to a national grocery chain, a deal that would increase their revenue by 40%. Diego had implemented a rotational grazing system that had increased their productivity by 40% while actually improving soil health. "The ranch has never been more profitable," Miguel announced proudly, his chest puffing out slightly. "Dad's thinking about expanding operations into Wyoming. We're looking at a spread up there that would nearly double our acreage." 3 generations of hard work finally paying off, my father added with satisfaction, his eyes gleaming with pride. Real business built on real value, serving real needs that will never go away. I smiled and offered congratulations, playing my part in the familiar family dynamic. Nobody asked for details about my life or work beyond polite surface-level questions. The conversation flowed around me like I was a guest rather than a family member, someone to be polite to, but not necessarily included in the important discussions. Aunt Rosa, who had always been my favorite relative, made more of an effort to engage me. "Tell us about California, Mija. Do you like living there? Have you made good friends?" "I do like it," I said, grateful for her genuine interest. "The weather is wonderful, and there's so much innovation happening. I've made some good friends through work." "Any special someone?" she asked with a knowing smile. I laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even me. "Not at the moment. My work keeps me pretty busy." "Too busy for romance?" Uncle Fernando chimed in. "That doesn't sound healthy for a young woman." Before I could respond, my mother called from the kitchen that dinner would be ready in 30 minutes. The announcement triggered a flurry of activity as people freshened drinks, helped with final preparations, and settled into the familiar rhythms of family gathering. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a space reserved for holidays and special occasions. The long wooden table had been handcrafted by my great-grandfather from oak trees that had grown on our own land, and it could easily seat 20 people. Tonight, it was set with the good china, delicate pieces with gold trim that had been my grandmother's wedding gift. crystal glasses that caught the light from the wrought iron chandelier, and silver that had been in the family for generations. I took my assigned seat between Aunt Rosa and my niece Sophia, directly across from my father at the head of the table. The arrangement felt symbolic somehow, me positioned as an observer rather than a central participant in the family dynamic. The meal began with my father's traditional Christmas prayer, a lengthy blessing that thanked God for family, prosperity, health, and another successful year of ranching. He spoke of the importance of tradition, of honoring those who came before us, and of building something lasting for future generations. As always, he made no mention of family members who had chosen different paths or achieved success outside the ranching world. Conversation flowed around topics I remembered from childhood: local politics, weather patterns that would affect next year's growing season, cattle prices and market trends, and community gossip about neighbours I barely remembered. There was discussion of the new highway project that might affect property values, debate about water rights and drought management, and speculation about whether the town's only high school would get funding for a new gymnasium. I found myself engaging primarily with the younger generation, asking Sophia about her plans for college and Luis about his interest in environmental science. Sophia, I learned, was a straight-A student with ambitions that extended far beyond Boulder Creek. Luis was fascinated by nature and spent most of his free time exploring the mountains around our property. "I want to study marine biology," Sophia told me quietly when her grandfather was engaged in a heated discussion about cattle futures with Uncle Fernando. "I want to work with coral reefs and help protect ocean ecosystems, but Grandpa says it's not practical. He thinks I should study business so I can help run the ranch someday." The irony was not lost on me. Here was the next generation facing the same pressure to conform to predetermined paths, the same dismissal of scientific interests that I had experienced. Sophia's passion for marine biology was just as strong as my childhood fascination with renewable energy had been. "Marine biology is fascinating," I told her, keeping my voice low. "The ocean ecosystems are crucial for understanding climate change and environmental protection. Have you looked into any summer programs or internships?" Her eyes lit up. "There's a program at the Monterey Bay Aquarium that I really want to apply for, but it's expensive, and my parents think it's a waste of money." "Follow your interests, Sophia," I said firmly. "There are more ways to build a meaningful life than our family has traditionally recognized. Don't let anyone convince you that your dreams are too big or too impractical." Miguel overheard the last part of our conversation and frowned. "Rebecca, don't fill her head with unrealistic ideas. Sophia needs to think practically about her future. The world is competitive enough without chasing impossible dreams." "I think she should think broadly about her future," I countered gently. "The world has more opportunities now than when we were kids." "Sophia is brilliant and passionate. Those are incredible assets no matter what field she chooses." "Some things don't change," my father interjected from across the table, his voice carrying the authority that had always ended family discussions. "Land, family, tradition, these are what matter. Everything else is just fashion that comes and goes. Sophia will always have a place here if she wants it to, but she needs to understand that security comes from building on solid foundations, not chasing whatever sounds exciting at the moment." I nodded diplomatically, not wanting to start an argument during Christmas dinner, but I caught Sophia's eye and gave her an encouraging smile that I hoped conveyed my support for her dreams. As we finished the main course, my father tapped his wine glass with his fork, the traditional signal that he had an announcement to make. The room fell silent as he stood, commanding attention exactly as he had throughout my childhood. Even after all these years, he still had the presence to quiet a room with a simple gesture. "Before Elena brings out her famous apple pie," he began, his voice carrying the authority that had made him a respected figure not just in our family, but throughout the region, "I have some important family business to discuss." Here we go, I thought, already anticipating what was coming. I had known this moment would arrive eventually, the formal discussion of succession and inheritance that had been implicit in every family gathering for years. As you all know, the Martinez Ranch has been growing steadily over the past several years, thanks largely to the excellent work of Miguel and Diego. My brothers straightened in their chairs, clearly pleased with the public recognition. Their wives, Sarah and Carmen, beamed proudly from their seats. "We have expanded our operations significantly, improved our breeding programs, and established relationships with premium buyers across the country," he continued, his voice taking on the formal tone he used for business presentations. "This means we are now one of the most successful cattle operations in Colorado, with plans to expand into neighboring states. Our reputation for quality has made us the preferred supplier for some of the finest restaurants in Denver, Boulder, and even as far away as Chicago." Murmurs of approval circulated around the table. My mother beamed proudly at my brothers, while my aunts and uncles nodded in satisfaction. Even the children seemed to understand that they were witnessing something important. With this growth comes the need for clear planning about the future of our family legacy. My father continued, his tone becoming more formal. I am 72 years old now, not getting any younger, and it's time to make certain decisions about succession and inheritance that will ensure the ranch continues to prosper for generations to come. I kept my expression neutral, already knowing where this was headed. I had been expecting this conversation for years, and in some ways, I was relieved that it was finally happening. At least now everything would be clear and official. Miguel will inherit the ranch operations and take over as CEO when I retire next year, he announced, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's verdict. His business acumen and leadership skills make him the natural choice to guide us into the next generation. He has proven himself over the past 8 years, increasing our profitability and expanding our market reach in ways that have exceeded my expectations. Miguel nodded solemnly, clearly having expected this outcome, but still moved by the formal recognition. Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with tears of pride. Diego will inherit equal ownership and serve as head of operations, overseeing all aspects of cattle management and land stewardship, my father continued. Together, they will preserve and expand the legacy that has sustained our family for 4 generations, ensuring that the Martinez name continues to be synonymous with quality and integrity in the ranching community. The table erupted in congratulations for my brothers. Aunt Rosa patted Miguel's hand while Uncle Fernando clapped Diego on the back. Uncle Tony raised his wine glass in a toast, praising their dedication and hard work. My mother smiled proudly, though I noticed her glance nervously in my direction. My father cleared his throat and the room quieted again, sensing that there was more to come. Then, looking directly at me with an expression that was both sad and resolute, he delivered the blow I had been expecting. As for inheritance matters, he said, his voice taking on a formal, almost legal tone, Rebecca will not be receiving a share of the ranch or family assets. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for a reaction, watching to see if I would cry, protest, or storm out. The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the wind whistling through the eaves, and the crackling of logs in the fireplace. You chose your path away from this family and our way of life, my father continued, as if explaining his reasoning to a board of directors rather than his daughter. Miguel and Diego have dedicated themselves to building what we started. They have earned the inheritance through their commitment, their sacrifices, and their unwavering loyalty to our family's legacy. I maintained my composure, meeting his gaze steadily. 8 years ago, this announcement might have devastated me. It might have triggered tears, anger, desperate attempts to change his mind, or pleas for reconsideration. But I was no longer that person seeking validation from a father who had never truly seen my worth. I understand, I said calmly, picking up my water glass and taking a sip. That seems fair. My response clearly surprised him. He had probably expected protests, emotional appeals, or at least visible disappointment. Instead, I simply continued eating my dinner as if he had announced the weather forecast. The calm acceptance in my voice seemed to unnerve him more than tears would have. The tension around the table was palpable. My mother looked pale, her hands gripping her napkin tightly as if it were a lifeline. Diego shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly not enjoying this moment as much as he had anticipated. Miguel tried to hide what looked suspiciously like satisfaction, but I caught the small smile that played at the corners of his mouth. Aunt Rosa was the first to break the silence. Carlos, was it really necessary to discuss this at Christmas dinner? Her disapproving tone suggested she found the timing inappropriate, even if she understood the decision. Surely family business could be handled privately. Family matters should be discussed with family present, my father replied firmly, settling back into his chair. There should be no secrets or surprises about something this important. Now, let's enjoy Elena's pie and celebrate the future of the Martinez Ranch. Conversations slowly resumed, though notably more subdued than before. I focused on my dessert, aware of the occasional glances of pity or curiosity directed my way. The apple pie was as delicious as always. My mother's secret recipe that used a combination of Granny Smith and Honeycrisp apples with just a hint of cardamom, but I barely tasted it. My niece Sophia leaned over and whispered, "Are you okay, Aunt Rebecca?" "I'm perfectly fine, sweetheart," I assured her with a genuine smile. Sometimes adults have complicated relationships, but that doesn't change how much I love you and your brother and your cousins. As I sat there, memories flooded back. Being told my college dreams were impractical, watching my brothers receive enthusiastic support for their conventional choices, years of subtle and not so subtle messages that my path was less valuable, less worthy of respect or investment. Yet beneath the familiar hurt was something new, a deep sense of peace. I no longer needed my father's approval or financial support. I had built something extraordinary on my own terms, something that would help heal the planet for Sophia's generation and beyond. No inheritance could match the satisfaction of that achievement or the knowledge that I had proven everyone wrong. I was contemplating the earliest polite time to make my exit when my nephew Alex, who had been quietly absorbed in his phone throughout dinner, suddenly gasped loudly. His reaction was so dramatic that all conversation ceased instantly and every head turned toward him. "Holy shit," he blurted out, then immediately covered his mouth and glanced fearfully at his grandfather. "Sorry, I mean, Aunt Rebecca is on the Forbes billionaire list." The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop in the sudden vacuum of sound that followed his words. "What are you talking about?" Miguel asked his son, frowning in confusion and clearly wondering if this was some kind of teenage joke or misunderstanding. "There must be another Rebecca Martinez," Diego said dismissively, waving his hand as if to brush away the ridiculous suggestion. "You're probably looking at someone else with the same name." Alex shook his head vigorously, his eyes wide with excitement and disbelief. "No, it's definitely her. Look." He turned his phone around, showing the screen to those nearest him. "It has her picture and everything. It says she's worth $4.7 billion. My heart rate increased as I realized my carefully maintained privacy was about to evaporate completely. The Forbes list had been published that morning, following the announcement of Tesla's acquisition of my company. My PR team had warned me I would be included, despite my requests to keep a low profile, but I had hoped to control when and how my family learned about my success. "Let me see that," my father demanded, extending his hand toward Alex with the authority he had always used when he wanted something immediately. My nephew stood and brought the phone to his grandfather, the device trembling slightly in his teenage hands. I watched as my father's expression transformed from skepticism to shock to something I couldn't quite identify. The color drained from his face as he stared at the screen, his weathered hands holding the phone as if it might explode. "This says you founded SolarVault Technologies," he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper as he looked up at me. His usual commanding tone was completely gone, replaced by something I had never heard before: uncertainty. "That Tesla just acquired your company for $12.8 billion, that you're worth $4.7 billion. All eyes turned to me. I could feel the weight of their stares, the mixture of disbelief, curiosity, and shock radiating from every person at the table. I took a deep breath, knowing the moment of truth had arrived far sooner than I had planned. "Yes," I confirmed simply, my voice steady despite the racing of my heart. "That's accurate." The room erupted. Everyone started talking at once. Exclamations of disbelief, rapid-fire questions, demands for explanations. The noise was overwhelming, a cacophony of voices that seemed to bounce off the walls and ceiling of the formal dining room. $4.7 billion? Miguel's voice cracked slightly on the number. "How is that even possible?" Carmen asked, her voice high with disbelief. "Tesla? Like the car company?" Uncle Fernando demanded. "You never said anything," Aunt Rosa exclaimed. I raised my hand slightly, and to my surprise, the table fell quiet. Perhaps wealth commanded attention even in this family. Or perhaps the shock was so complete that they were willing to listen to anything I had to say. "I founded SolarVault Technologies 8 years ago," I explained calmly, my voice carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent room. "We developed advanced battery storage systems for renewable energy. Last month, Tesla acquired us for $12.8 billion in cash and stock." $4.7 billion, my mother repeated, her voice small and confused, as if she were trying to understand a foreign language. "But why didn't you tell us? All these years we thought..." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, but I knew what she meant. They thought I was struggling, barely getting by, chasing impossible dreams while my brothers built something real and substantial. I looked at her with genuine affection, seeing the hurt and confusion in her eyes. Because I wanted to be valued for who I am, not what I've achieved or accumulated. When I left 8 years ago, it was clear that my path wasn't understood or respected by this family. I needed to prove to myself that I could succeed on my own terms before I could even think about sharing that success with others. Miguel's face had turned an interesting shade of red, a mixture of embarrassment and anger that I remembered from our childhood conflicts. "So all this time, while we thought you were struggling with some small startup, barely making ends meet, you were building a multi-billion-dollar company?" "It wasn't overnight," I clarified, wanting them to understand the reality of what building a company actually involved. "The first 5 years were extremely difficult. We almost went bankrupt 3 times. I lived in a tiny apartment in one of the worst neighborhoods in San Francisco and put every penny back into the company. There were months when I wasn't sure I could afford both rent and food." I paused, remembering those dark early days when failure seemed not just possible, but inevitable. The breakthrough came 4 years ago when our battery technology proved it could store renewable energy 3 times more efficiently than existing systems while lasting 10 times longer. After that, contracts started flowing in from around the world. "You could have shared your success with us," my father said, And for the first time that evening, I heard something other than authority in his voice. It might have been hurt, or regret, or something even more complex that I couldn't identify. I met his gaze directly, no longer the uncertain young woman who had left this house 8 years ago. Would it have mattered, Dad? You made it clear that the only path you respected was following in your footsteps. The only success you valued was the kind Miguel and Diego achieved by staying on the ranch and building on what you started. The uncomfortable truth settled over the table like a heavy blanket. Several people shifted in their seats, suddenly finding their dessert plates fascinating. Carmen, Diego's wife, broke the tension with a practical question that I was grateful for. What exactly does your company do? I mean, how does battery storage work, and why is it worth so much money? I welcomed the redirect and launched into a more detailed explanation. Think about the fundamental problem with renewable energy. The sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, but people need electricity 24 hours a day. Traditional power plants can be turned on and off as needed, but solar panels and wind turbines only produce power when conditions are right. I could see understanding beginning to dawn on several faces around the table. Even the children were listening intently now. Our technology allows renewable energy to be stored efficiently for use when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing. We developed solid-state batteries that last longer, charge faster, and hold more energy than anything else on the market. This means utilities can now rely on solar and wind power as their primary energy sources instead of coal or natural gas. That actually sounds really important, Diego admitted, looking somewhat sheepish. Like for the environment and everything, climate change and all that. It is, I confirmed, feeling a warmth toward my younger brother that I hadn't experienced in years. Our technology is being used in over 40 countries now. We're helping reduce global carbon emissions by millions of tons per year. The impact is measurable and growing every month. Alex was practically vibrating with excitement in his chair. Aunt Rebecca, this is so cool. I've been researching renewable energy for a school project on climate change. Your company is mentioned in like every article about battery technology. Some of the papers I read said that solid-state batteries could completely revolutionize the energy industry. Sophia leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest and what looked like newfound respect. So you're actually saving the planet? Like for real? I smiled at her enthusiasm, remembering my own excitement at her age when I first learned about the potential of clean technology. I'm contributing to solutions that will help preserve the planet for your generation and beyond. Climate change is the defining challenge of your lifetime, and technology like ours gives me hope that we can actually solve it. $4.7 billion, my father repeated, still seeming dazed. He looked down at the phone in his hands as if it might provide some additional explanation. And I just told you that you wouldn't be getting an inheritance. The irony wasn't lost on anyone at the table. A few nervous chuckles escaped before being quickly stifled. The whole situation would have been comical if it weren't so emotionally charged. I think I'm doing okay without it, I said, with a small smile, trying to ease the tension that was thick enough to cut with a knife. Miguel, ever the businessman, was already shifting into calculation mode. I could practically see the gears turning in his head as he processed the implications of having a billionaire sister. We should discuss potential synergies between our operations. Solar power could significantly reduce our energy costs. Maybe we could even become completely carbon neutral, market our beef as environmentally sustainable. I'm sure Rebecca has more important things to do than help out the family ranch now, Aunt Rosa interjected with a knowing look. She had always been the most perceptive member of our extended family, able to see through pretense and manipulation with remarkable clarity. My mother had tears in her eyes, a mixture of pride and regret that was painful to witness. I'm so proud of you, she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. I always knew you were special, but this is extraordinary. I can't believe we didn't know. Had she really known? I wondered. Or was this retrospective pride, the kind that emerges when success becomes undeniable? Either way, I appreciated the sentiment and the genuine emotion behind it. Why did you come here in a rental car if you're so wealthy? Sophia asked with the bluntness that only teenagers can manage, cutting straight to the heart of practical matters. I laughed genuinely for the first time that evening, a sound that surprised even me with its naturalness. I didn't want to make a grand entrance or have people treat me differently because of money. I wanted to reconnect as just Rebecca, not as some billionaire CEO. I wanted to see if we could rebuild our relationships based on who we are as people, not what we've accomplished or accumulated. That worked out well, Diego commented dryly, but with a hint of humor that suggested he was beginning to process the shock. The dynamic in the room had shifted completely. My father seemed smaller somehow, less commanding in his chair at the head of the table. The authority that had defined him for as long as I could remember appeared to have been shaken by this revelation. Miguel was visibly recalculating my value to him. I could almost see the gears turning in his head as he considered what having a billionaire sister might mean for his own ambitions. Diego appeared genuinely curious about my story, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time in years. But it was the reaction of the youngest generation that gave me the most hope. Alex was firing off questions about clean technology and entrepreneurship that showed real engagement and understanding. Sophia was looking at me with wide-eyed admiration, as if I had suddenly transformed from the family disappointment into someone worth emulating. Even the twins, Luis and Maria, were listening intently instead of fidgeting as they usually did during adult conversations. "How did you know it would work?" Luis asked suddenly, his 10-year-old mind cutting to one of the most important questions. "How did you know your batteries would be better than everyone else's?" I considered the question seriously, remembering the uncertainty and fear that had characterized those early years. "I didn't know, Luis. That's the scary truth about starting a company. You can do all the research and testing you want, but you never really know if people will want what you're building until you put it out in the world." "Weren't you scared?" Maria asked, her voice small but curious. "Terrified," I admitted. "Every single day for the first 3 years. I was scared we'd run out of money. I was scared our technology wouldn't work as well as we hoped. I was scared that people much smarter than me would solve the same problems faster and better." "What made you keep going?" Alex asked, his teenage voice serious, in a way that reminded me of myself at his age. I paused, thinking about how to explain the complex mixture of stubbornness, passion, and perhaps foolishness that had driven me through those difficult years. I believed that what we were working on mattered. Climate change isn't going to solve itself, and I felt like I had knowledge and skills that could actually make a difference. Even when everything seemed impossible, I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. As the initial shock wore off, the conversation fragmented into smaller discussions. I found myself describing the early days of my company to a captivated audience of aunts and uncles, explaining how we had secured our first round of funding from venture capitalists who barely understood our technology, and the breakthrough moment when our prototype outperformed every competing system in independent testing. I told them about the all-nighters spent debugging software, the failed experiments that cost us months of grace, the regulatory hurdles that nearly killed the company before we had a chance to prove ourselves. I described the moment when our first major customer, a utility company in Nevada, called to say that our batteries had exceeded all performance expectations and they wanted to order 10 times as many units as originally planned. Through it all, my father remained uncharacteristically quiet, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was it regret, reevaluation, pride, or simply calculation of what my new status might mean for him and the ranch? I noticed him studying me as if seeing me for the first time, taking in details he had missed or dismissed before. Perhaps he was wondering when I had changed from the uncertain young woman who had left 8 years ago into someone who could command a room full of adults with stories of billion-dollar acquisitions and global impact. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed with an urgent text from my CTO, Dr. Sarah Kim. There was a critical issue with one of our manufacturing facilities in Germany, a software glitch that was affecting production of batteries for a major European utility project. The text was followed immediately by a call from our head of operations, who explained that the problem required my immediate attention and authorization to shut down the production line until the issue could be resolved. I found my mother in the kitchen, where she was putting away the last of the dinner dishes. "I have to leave early," I explained. "There's a work emergency that needs my immediate attention. One of our facilities in Germany is having problems, and I need to get on a video call with our team there." "Of course, Mia," she said, understanding in her eyes. "Will we see you again before you fly back to California?" "I'll make time," I promised. "Maybe we could have breakfast tomorrow, just the two of us? I feel like we have a lot to catch up on." Her face lit up with a smile that reminded me of my childhood. "I would love that. There's so much I want to tell you, so much I want to understand about your life." As I said my goodbyes, I was struck by how different they felt from my arrival just a few hours earlier. There were genuine hugs from my niece and nephews, warm embraces from my aunts and uncles who seemed to see me in an entirely new light, and even respectful handshakes from my brothers that felt more like acknowledgements between equals than the patronizing gestures from earlier in the evening. Alex pressed a piece of paper into my hand as I hugged him goodbye. "That's my email," he said quietly. "I'm really interested in renewable energy engineering. Maybe we could talk sometime about college programs and stuff?" "Absolutely," I assured him. "I'd love to help you explore your options." Sophia hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for what you said about following my dreams. I'm going to apply for that marine biology program no matter what anyone says." "Good for you," I whispered back, "and let me know if you need help with the application or anything else." My father walked me to the door, something he hadn't done since I was a child leaving for school. The gesture felt significant, though I wasn't sure exactly what it meant. "We need to talk," he said quietly, his voice lacking the commanding tone that had characterized all our previous conversations. "There's a lot to figure out, a lot I need to understand." I nodded cautiously. "I'd like that. But Dad, this conversation can't just be about money or business opportunities. If we're going to rebuild our relationship, it has to be based on mutual respect, not my net worth." He was quiet for a long moment, standing in the doorway of the house that had been his domain for decades. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful in a way I had rarely heard. "I think I'm beginning to understand that," he said finally. "I think I'm beginning to understand a lot of things I should have seen years ago. Will you call me tomorrow?" "Yes," I promised. "I will." Driving away from the ranch that night, I reflected on how dramatically the evening had unfolded. The revelation of my wealth had forced a reckoning that was long overdue. But money alone couldn't heal the wounds of years of misunderstanding and dismissal. That would require something much more valuable than billions: honesty, accountability, and a willingness to change on all sides. But for the first time in 8 years, I felt that such healing might actually be possible. The way my niece and nephews had looked at me, the genuine curiosity in Diego's questions, even the stunned silence from Miguel, it all suggested that perhaps my family was capable of seeing me as more than just the daughter who had chosen the wrong path. The next morning, I had breakfast with my mother at a small cafe in downtown Boulder Creek. Over coffee and homemade pastries, she told me about the folder she had hidden in her bedroom closet. Newspaper clippings, magazine articles, and printed web pages documenting my company's growth and success over the years. "I followed everything," she admitted, tears in her eyes. "Every time your company was mentioned in the news, every interview you gave, every award you received. I was so proud, but I didn't know how to tell your father. I didn't know how to bridge the gap between what you had become and what he thought you should be." 3 months later, I found myself back in Colorado, but this time for a very different reason. I had just announced the establishment of the Martinez Clean Energy Institute at Colorado State University, funded with a $500 million endowment from my foundation. The institute would focus on developing renewable energy technologies, specifically for rural and agricultural communities. Solutions that could help ranchers and farmers reduce their environmental impact while improving their economic sustainability. My father had surprised me by asking to attend the announcement ceremony. Even more surprising, he had insisted on introducing me to the audience of students, faculty, and community leaders who had gathered for the event. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said from the podium, looking out at a crowd that included many of our neighbors and friends from Boulder Creek, "I want to introduce someone who has taught me that there are many ways to honor your heritage and serve your community." He paused, his voice carrying an emotion I had rarely heard from him. The man who had always been so certain, so commanding, seemed vulnerable in a way that was both surprising and deeply moving. My daughter Rebecca chose a path I didn't understand, pursued dreams I couldn't see the value in, and built something I never thought possible. She has shown me that true legacy isn't about preserving what came before, but about using the values you inherit to build something better for the future. As he gestured for me to join him at the podium, I saw tears in his eyes, something I had never witnessed in nearly 4 decades of life. She is living proof that when we support our children's dreams instead of limiting them to our own vision, they can change the world. The audience erupted in applause, but all I could focus on was my father's face. This was the man who had raised me, flawed but capable of growth. The man who had finally learned to see me for who I truly was. Later that evening, we sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains that had shaped both our lives. The Colorado sky was painted in brilliant oranges and purples, and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. "I've been thinking about what you said at Christmas," he told me, his voice quiet in the gathering dusk. "About wanting to be valued for who you are, not what you've achieved." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. This was clearly difficult for him, admitting error and acknowledging change in a way that went against everything he'd been taught about authority and leadership. "I realized I made the same mistake with you that my father made with me," he said quietly. He only saw value in following the exact path he had laid out. I thought I was being different by supporting Miguel and Diego's innovations, by encouraging them to modernize the ranch, but I was still only seeing one acceptable way to succeed. "Dad," I began, but he held up his hand in a gesture that was gentle rather than commanding. "Let me finish. I want you to know that I'm proud of who you are, not just what you've built. I'm proud of your courage to leave when we couldn't support your dreams. I'm proud of your persistence when everyone told you it was impossible. And I'm proud that you came back to try to heal our family despite having every reason to stay away." Those words meant more to me than any dollar amount ever could. They represented a fundamental shift in how my father saw me, how he understood success and value and the meaning of family. "I want to try to do better," he continued, "not just with you, but with Sophia and Alex and Luis and Maria. I want them to know that their grandfather supports their dreams, whatever they might be." 6 months later, Sophia called to tell me she had been accepted to the marine biology program at UC San Diego with a full scholarship. My father had not only supported her application, but had helped her apply for additional funding and even offered to cover her living expenses. "Grandpa said you taught him that the ocean and the ranch aren't so different," she told me excitedly during our video call. "Both are complex ecosystems that need to be understood and protected. He's even talking about implementing some conservation practices on the ranch that could help with water quality in the local streams." Alex had decided to study renewable energy engineering and was planning to spend the summer interning at SolarVolt's Denver facility, which we had opened specifically to serve the Mountain West region. Diego had surprised everyone by expressing interest in installing solar panels across the ranch property, making it one of the first carbon-neutral cattle operations in Colorado. Even Miguel had evolved, establishing a program to help other ranching families transition to sustainable practices. He had approached me about potential collaboration between SolarVolt and the agricultural community, like recognizing that clean energy could actually improve rather than threaten traditional ways of life. Change, I had learned, was possible at any age and in any family. It required courage, patience, and the willingness to admit when you've been wrong. But most importantly, it required love, the kind of love that sees potential instead of limitations, that supports dreams instead of trying to control them. My net worth might have been measured in billions, but my true wealth was measured in these healed relationships, in the knowledge that the next generation of my family would grow up knowing that their dreams mattered, whatever form they might take. The ranch was still the center of our family's identity, but it was no longer the only acceptable path to success or fulfillment. Sophia could pursue marine biology while still honoring her heritage. Alex could study renewable energy while maintaining his connection to the land. Luis and Maria would grow up knowing that their interests and passions were valued, not dismissed. If you're reading this and you've ever felt misunderstood by your family, or if you're a parent struggling to support a child whose dreams don't match your expectations, I hope my story offers some encouragement. Remember that success comes in many forms, that there are countless ways to honor your heritage while still forging your own path. The greatest gift we can give our children and ourselves is the freedom to become who we're meant to be, not just who others expect us to be. It took nearly 4 decades and a few $1 billion for my family to learn this lesson, but the important thing is that we learned it at all. Have you ever had to prove your worth to family members who doubted your path? Have you found ways to heal relationships that seemed irreparably damaged? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please upvote and share it with someone who might need to hear that their unconventional dreams are valid and valuable. Thank you for reading, and remember, sometimes the best way to honor where you came from is to have the courage to go where others can't imagine. Sometimes the greatest inheritance you can leave isn't money or property, but the example that following your dreams is not only possible, but necessary for a life well lived.